So, here's something that I thought would be fun to talk about, guys, and that is the idea of a villain for Captain Marvel 2. Now, a lot of people have been saying, oh, it needs to be Rogue for Captain Marvel 2, and I'm not going to argue that. I'm not going to argue with that. But what if we had somebody else other than Rogue as Captain Marvel's enemy, and that is Raven Darkholme, aka Mystique. Now, Mystique, you may be wondering, but she's an X-Men villain. She's not really why would she attack Captain Marvel? Why would she have been an enemy for Carol? What a lot of people forget is that Mystique was not only an X-Men villain, she was also an enemy for Carol in the comics. A lot of Carol's rogues galleries weren't exactly like from her own comics. You know, a lot of her enemies were villains for other people. Among them was Mystique and subsequently Rogue as well. Now, Carol... a lot of people... Now, here's the reason why you're probably thinking, well, Mystique doesn't have, isn't going to hold a candle to Carol's power. I mean, we clearly saw her just no-scope her way through, just solo her way through an entire Kree armada and then destroy Thanos' ship. She's way too powerful and would crush Mystique. And people have been saying, oh, the only way you can make Carol relatable is if you depower her or lessen her powers. I respectfully disagree in that regard. Because, here's the thing, was Thor too powerful? Could we relate to Thor because he was, Thor's a god. He's all-powerful, and you couldn't relate to him there? Or how about the Hulk? Or how about Superman? I know, DC, but follow my train of logic. It doesn't matter the amount of power a character has, it's how you use that character and its power. It's kind of like, a lot of us really related to Hulk and Thor in the MCU because they were dealt with problems that they couldn't just punch their way out of. And that's the same thing with Superman. Now, the reason why I really thought of Mystique as such an interesting villain for Carol, and again, let me tell you the scenario, and if you're wondering, well, how do mutants play into this version of the MCU? Just ignore that, and for sake of argument, let's just say that we have mutants in the MCU, and Raven is among them. So, Mystique, I was trying to say her real name, Mystique, let's say for this argument that Mystique has been more or less hiding like she has in the Bryan Singer X-Men movies and put herself in a place of power through her shape-shifting. And let's say the conflict is that Carol destroyed an operation that Mystique was working on. And now that she's in a place of power, she can basically attack Carol in a way that she hasn't really thought of. In that you make her a public enemy number one, or you put her in a situation that she just can't punch her way out of. The thing with Carol is that from so far what we've seen is that she's a little arrogant, she's very brash, and her powers are her go-to thing, and going, full power. Remember in that first scene where she came to Earth, she just blasted a mannequin, thinking it was a real person. And I understand that's for lulz, but that introduces to her character that she's, shoots first, asks questions later. So let's say we put her in a scenario where Mystique is after Captain Marvel on the grounds of, well, Carol ruined my operation I was working on, so I'm going to make her public enemy number one. So, frames her, whether by shape-shifting and using, maybe some of the tech that Mysterio left behind, and makes it look like she's using her powers, and makes Carol the public enemy. And with her shape-shifting abilities, she gets in good with the government, and they're like, yeah, she's Carol's out of control, we need to contain her. And that puts Carol in a situation where she has to, she can't just punch her way out of. It's very much like, in most cases of why Lex Luthor is Superman's greatest enemy, because, well, Luthor has all of that protection. He has that great mind. Superman just can't go up to Luthor and punch his head off, even though he could very well do that. He can't because he has those morals. Now, Carol, as we've seen so far, doesn't really have that same qualm about killing someone, but let's say for sake of argument that in here, Carol is now gotten to a point where she's been an Avenger for a long enough time, and now she's kind of understanding the rules of how this team, what's left of the Avengers to work. So now, after Mystique's tampering with her, she's now on her own, and now you could even have some of the Avengers coming after her, like, yeah, that thing with Spider-Man murdering, we still don't know what the whole deal is, but Spider-Man apparently killing Mysterio, that put us in a bad light again, and no one wants to go through a civil war again. So, Carol, you need to come with us. And Carol now can fight someone, but she can't use her full power because these are her friends, and they break very easily. I mean, let's be real. The only person who could really, like, physically fight her was Thor, and he's off with the Guardians of the Galaxy. So the remaining Avengers could probably go after her, and if you want to have someone who can physically stand up to her, by this time when we get to a second Captain Marvel movie, there is a character that by now, when we get to the second Captain Marvel movie, there's a character in this universe that can, stand up to her on a physical level on Earth. She-Hulk. Yeah, for those who remember, we know we're getting a She-Hulk show that's going to be set in the MCU, and we know, and Kevin Feige has said that, these new Marvel shows are going to tie directly to the MCU in a big way. So, yeah, now you actually have someone who can fight Carol on a physical level. That's a big thing. And let's face it, the two strongest women in the Marvel Universe throwing down, I'd be down for that. And again, you may be wondering, well, why not just send Rogue in here? Well, like I said, you could have Rogue in here, and you could have it all part of Mystique's plan to essentially take apart Carol's life. You could almost do a born-again situation with Carol. You could have Carol go through this arc of, hey, I use my powers a little too recklessly. I'm a very shoot-from-the-hip kind of person. Maybe that style isn't working for me anymore, and I need to outthink this situation. I need to, think about how these choices I've made have affected people. I didn't think about it much, but I did some really bad before I decided to be a superhero. So that would be that could be a major thing, and now she's on. And also, let's also not forget that Carol hasn't really had a lot of time on Earth. I mean, really, a couple days, maybe a week or two at most on Earth at the Captain Marvel movie in the 90s, and then being out in space, where I imagine diplomacy is not a big thing, because because the way I've seen the MCU version of space is that it's the Wild Wild West. So again, she's very used to that, diplomacy second, fist first kind of way of thinking. And the only other time she was at Earth is after, the snap happened. And then, even then, she was out in space in that 5-year time gap. Where I imagine that shoot first, ask questions later mentality was on a bigger level. So she hasn't really acclimated to a lot of Earth's customs, so she would have to really restrain herself. And again, she hasn't really had to think her way out of a situation before. So again, Mystique can be that villain that can challenge her on a different level, much like how, like Luthor challenges Superman to think outside the box and how to combat him. And again, you could have, if you want to have more villains in here, you could have Mystique as a fun thing, maybe Mystique in her human persona, or whatever form she's taking, whether that be she's shapeshifted into a person, or she makes herself look human and just calls herself Raven Darkholm, goes by her real name to manipulate people. You could have her be like, hey, let's bring out the Thunderbolts to fight, to hunt her down, or something like that. Like, maybe after Spider-Man, if they're going to keep that in canon, mind you, the Far From Home spoiler, hey, after Spider-Man, quote-unquote, murdered Mysterio and we found his identity out, and also, heroes were kind of, there was kind of like a lot of heroes that were, we lost faith in superheroes after they kind of lost, they lost to Thanos and left us 5 years with half a population gone. So maybe, Raven kind of manipulates the government, or, into basically forming like the Thunderbolts to have her go after them, or again, have the Avengers go at this new team of Avengers to go after her, forcing Carol to kind of really pull her punches. So yeah, again, I don't think I see this argument a lot of, oh, Carol's way too powerful, she's way too OP. And by that logic, Goku is too OP to be, you know, relatable or anything like that. If we're going by that train of logic, so I don't think the powers are Carol's problem. I think the fact that why so many people were turned off by Carol was because she just kind of, you know, bullhorned her way through the situation, and it worked. And that was, you know, she needs to have an opponent or a cause to make her kind of think first before fighting. Like the Carol we know from the comics. Not Civil War II Carol. Not Civil War II Carol. I'm talking like Kelly Sue DeConnick era run, you know, good era Carol Danvers. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on the whole matter. So you guys tell me in the comments below, what do you guys think of the idea of Mystique as the main villain for Captain Marvel 2? Again, let's not get into the whole how do mutants fit factor in the MCU now. Let's just, for sake of argument, just say like Raven, you know, I keep saying Raven Darkholm. I don't know why, I just go by the real name, but let's say for sake of argument, we have Mystique, she's the villain, and we're gonna focus on her for this story. You know, how does that factor in? So yeah, so you guys tell me in the comments below, what do you guys think of the idea of Mystique in here as the villain? Would you have Rogue in here? Or do you think another villain should be the villain for Captain Marvel 2, like maybe the Power Scroll or something to that degree? Just comment below, let me know, and once again, hope you all enjoyed this, and I will see you guys later.